Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday afternoon clinic from the Potomac Division. We have Kurt Thompson with us, and I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Good afternoon, everybody. If you see me looking to my right, I've got the participants stack list over on the secondary screen. But what we're here today is to talk about the AP division, the AP dispatcher's paperwork. And the subject of the meeting is how to demystify the AP dispatcher paperwork. I am a master model railroader. I do hold the certificate. And what we're going to do is first off, we're going to talk about the requirements. But I'm going to back up just a hair. The reason for this clinic is a now current master model railroader who has been a longtime friend of mine was having trouble making heads or tails out of the paperwork. And Martin said, "You have this one, don't you, Kurt?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." It was the first one I got. And Martin said, "Fine, drive over here. We're going to sit down. I need you to help me with my paperwork." I said, "Okay, fine." And from that came the glaringly obvious thing is that the paperwork, people's perception of the paperwork and the requirements is over stringent. So that this clinic is about what are the requirements, what are they in reality, not what are they in our expectations, and show you what it really takes to get there. So let's talk about first off the requirements. And the big things are you have to have 50 hours of documented operations on one or more layouts with some type of control in place for train and car movement. Number two, you have to complete the necessary paperwork, and we'll get into that. Three, you turn in the necessary paperwork. And then four, you reach the point where your AP dispatcher certificate is mailed back to your division AP guy, and he hands it to you. So it's a simple 1, 2, 3, 4 process. And like all things that I preach about in the AP program, don't make this more complicated. It's not complicated. And to remember, most of all, we're doing this for fun. Okay? Now for the long-winded versions of the operating requirements. You must participate in the operation of a model railroad, either on a club or a home layout, for no less than 50 hours. And it doesn't all have to be on one layout. It can be on multiple layouts. A minimum of 10 hours must be served in each of the 3 of the 5 categories, which are listed below. Now, the kicker is one of those must be the dispatcher. The others are engineer, whether it's mainline, freight, passenger, or way freight, yard master, and subsidiary of that is a station master, the hostler or the power desk, a towerman, traffic manager, road master are all one other category, and of course, dispatcher. And this experience shall be accumulated on one or more model railroaders having at least 2 mainline trains, plus yard switching and simultaneous operation, with some system of freight and passenger train and car movements, including road switching, shall be used for controlling the activity. In other words, car cards, timetable and train order, train warrant control, direct warrant control, variations of the same. All right, let's just run through the descriptions of the jobs. Category A, engineer. Passenger mainline freight engineer, a way freight engineer, okay, switching engineer if you're doing a local. Yard master or station master. Some bigger yards have a yard master and one I operate on has 2 yard masters. One of the yard masters also oversees a switching crew. A a hostler or the power desk, the person in charge of assigning and getting motive power to the right train, traffic manager, a towerman, or roadmaster, and the big kahuna himself, the man with the big sheet of paper, the chief dispatcher. Now, what you see on your screen there is the record of operations. This is the form that is on the NMRA national website, and it's one of the forms you have to have filled out. And this breaks down, the 5 categories for you. Now, how do you keep track of all that? Well, this form you need, but this is the one where this is the record of activities is the one you take to your op sessions, or you take to the guy who was at the op session with you within a week. Why do I say within a week? Because you'll forget, and he'll forget. And then you go back to backfilling paperwork, which is the trouble of everything. I'll explain why I know about that and that aspect as we get a little further in when we talk about my own paperwork. But as you can see, it says the railroad name, the job, the date of the operation, the number of hours, and the person who verified it. Okay. Person who verified it should be an active NMRA member at the time of the paperwork. Okay. More documentation. The applicant shall also do the following: prepare a schematic drawing of the model railroad layout, meeting the operational requirements and conditions described in Section A, and indicating all pertinent simulated distances. Normally, this would be a diagram of one of the layouts on which your qualifying time is earned, but is not required to be. Now, the drawing must be neat and readable. It does not have to be in ink. The applicant shall also do the following: develop a timetable appropriate to the model railroad, simulating prototype time covering a period of 8 or more hours, during which at least 3 scheduled mainline trains move in each direction. So a total of 6 trains going 3 each way. And you can use a computer to generate this paperwork. Okay, this image is from the November 92 Model Railroading magazine on page 40. This is a picture, a diagram of Ed Martin's South Mountain Division chassis railroad. And this is the one that I qualified all my hours on. 2 main yards. Marietta is the big yard in the lower center, and Ellenport East and West yards was the second. And this was a point-to-point operation, although in the great scheme of things, it could be operated as a continuous loop operation if you wanted. There were, if you can see the turntable in Marietta, there actually was an assigned hostler for that position, who was subordinate, of course, to the Marietta yardmaster. And in the area between the 2 lobes where it says Stone Arch, that was where the chief dispatcher had an elevated control booth, because Ed's layout was operational in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and it was pre-DCC. It was DC, isolated block, dual isolation. And the dispatcher, besides controlled train movement through Mother May I and a rotary switch. There were 3 mainline throttles, and the dispatcher assigned the throttle you were on to the block where your train was. So he could shut you down in a hurry. As willing, he should have been in control. Okay, back to the documentation. The applicant shall also do the following: prepare a schematic drawing of model railroad layout, meeting the operational requirements. Okay, this is just a repeat of the other things. Again, the drawing must be neat and legible, but does not have to be in ink. Okay, This is the schematic track plan, or actually it's the schematic of Ed Martin's layout. And these are photocopies of what I submitted for my certificate. And they were not in ink, they were in very sharp pencil. Here's what the left-hand one was. And you can see the simulated mileage markers across in 5-mile increments, highly compressed. Passing track. Ed always told us that his layout, though we operated it frequently as a double track main, was technically a single track main line with very long passing sidings. He used to yell at Phil Sieg, who was the primary dispatcher, and he yelled at me more than a few times about appropriately holding trains at the end of the double track and not using the passing sidings as free floating main line. What Ed didn't know, sometimes Ed didn't need to know. Okay. Also, here are all the notes, because there were a lot of sneak bys. There were, 4 different places where you could connect 2 of the staging areas lapped through, and they were hidden. So, and this is the timetable that I developed for the operation, and I actually did 24 hours. And it was based on the regular trains that we operated. We had passenger trains which ran when Ed started yelling the words, run the passenger trains, run the passenger trains. Other than that, it was pretty much a freight operation. And we ran scheduled freights as second class, and the locals were run third class, and their numbers denoted that. Mainline freights were numbered in the 20 series, and the locals were in the 30 series. So you can see from Ellenport all the way to Marietta Yard from the bottom to the top. And then from that, you have to draw a schematic of the timetable and develop the timetable. So here is the timetable interpretation with the string diagram showing the operation of those 4 trains and where they passed. Now, for those who are old enough to remember dot matrix printers, this was an advanced copy. I had a 21 pin, actually 21 or 23 pin dot matrix printer, and this was state of the art at the time. It was far superior to the 9-pin printers that were out. I hate to say how badly these would look if I reprinted them using a laser printer now. This would be, well, it is what it is. But as you can see, that there's 1, 2, 3 meets listed, and showing the 6 of the trains that were 6 of the trains listed on the timetable. And here are the other 2. So this covers a 24-hour period. In the left-hand timetable, you see the 2 trains going basically across each other. We had 2 locals that ran from Bourbon Pass and switched there, and then exchanged train crews halfway to Terrence. And the Terrence crew did their switching, and they basically did a whole train block swap. And that's what's indicated on that second panel, the left panel. So this is what I did for number 3. I developed an operating track plan graph and interpreted the timetable. And it shows the positions involved, descriptions, and pertinent times, and movement data for all those meets. And then 4, you have to develop or adapt the system of operation and showing all the forms and stuff. Now, for car movements on Ed's layout, we use the ever popular paperclip method, which each car had a 3x5 index card. And in the center of the card had the car name, the reporting marks, what it was, and around the perimeter of the two sides and the top were the names of various industries or yards um, around the card. So when you went to do the local switching, you left the card in the appropriate card box, but you moved the paper clip to the next mark. So it was manually advanced. Um, this is what I presented for one of the meets that I had to document, and this is between a commuter run around the layout from Marietta to Ellenport, and one of the mainline freights, and this is up at Bourbon Pass. And as you can see, I showed the time sketch of it with over a 12 simulated minute period, including the commuter train arriving and the dispatcher routing the manifest freight around it on the off main, so this to keep the railroad fluid and moving. And here's kind of a blow up view of the three segments. And you can see there's passenger train 21, or that's the freight train 21 coming into Bourbon Pass. As 62, the commuter train is on the near track. And Bourbon Pass is at the end of double track segment. So 21 has to go around and get back on the single track main headed to Terrence, while the conductor of the passenger train is very careful to discharge his patrons on the station side with no one getting off on the off side. Now, the paperwork says that you have to have at least 50 hours. When I was involved with Ed Martin's crew, known within themselves as the Riff Raff, that's RIFF, RAFF, we operated 45 Friday nights a year. If the Friday fell on a long federal holiday, we didn't operate. If Friday was a holiday, we didn't operate. We did operate Thanksgiving Fridays, and I was involved with them for over 2.5 years. So if you do the math, I did well over 3 hours. I did basically 135 hours a year for 2.5 years. So in excess of 300 hours. I did not document all of that. I documented 81 hours, including 15 hours as dispatcher, because never submit the paperwork with just the bare minimum hours or points or time units, because if one of your things is reviewed and not found valid, it gets kicked back to you. So when I did mine, I was no longer living in Montgomery County. I had been married and moved to Western Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, and was active in the Mid-Central Region, Division 2, not the Potomac Division of the MER. I filled out the paperwork and sent it back to both Ed and Bill McMillan, who is a master model railroader. Unfortunately, he's deceased, for their signatures to verify my paperwork. Remember what I said earlier about do the paperwork while you're having the fun, not trying to reconstruct it? Okay, I sent the paperwork I was doing this 2.5 years after I had left Montgomery County and moved on. Okay, and you can look and see at this screen, this shows you the status of the paperwork that was on the website, the national paperwork at that time. But you can see Bill McMillan's signature there and Ed Martin's and the dates they signed it in 91. And then they were kind enough to mail the forms back to me. As you can see, the chicken scratch, the railroad on the right-hand paperwork, South Mountain Division, and the category of the job, A category, B category. Down at the bottom, you can see, as I said, the 15 plus hours of dispatcher that I did, and I submitted a total of 81 hours. Okay, this is how I did it. The other stuff is, it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to meet the requirements. At this point, I'm going to stop my screen share and then we can have an open discussion. And I'll be happy to answer questions. If you've got your paperwork and you want to show it, we can talk about it. But that's what I did. This is the first AP certificate I earned. It's what I call the social. It's one of the 3 social certificates, in my opinion, because if I had to be involved with a lot of people. The other 2 social ones, in my estimation, are author and volunteer. So this was my first certificate. I was so proud of getting it because that was the thing I had done the most at that time in my model railroading career and had by far the most fun I had. The riffraff were a great group of guys to be with, and there was plenty of verbal abuse given and plenty of it traded around, and it was a great time in my model railroading career to be with the riffraff and to earn my AP certificate for dispatching. So if we want to end the recording here, and then we can do questions, answers, and seminar stuff.